Joining us now is Christopher Hahn, progressive pundit and former senior aide to Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York. Chris, glad to have you on the program.
Great to be here, John. Nice to hear from you.
Well, Chris, I know it's the dog days of August, and politics isn't on the foremost issue on most people's minds, but things are still happening. Things are happening out there with Hillary, with the Republicans, with Congress, with the budget crisis, President Obama. Tell us in general, how you view the political situation in America today.
You know, I think that it's the calm before the storm in the political situation. It's really, everybody's asking themselves on both sides of the aisle, will there be a government shutdown when we reach a point where we have to make some decisions on both the budget and on the debt ceiling? And I think that the Republicans, the establishment Republicans in Washington, D.C., fear this the most because regardless of how it's spun by them, they're going to be blamed for it. And I know that most establishment Republicans that I've talked to don't want to see that happen. But the Tea Party, Rand Paul types are looking to do that. Marco Rubio, who has generally been been able to work with most of the Democrats in the Senate, is feeling the need to be a leader in this government shutdown push because of the backlash he took for doing immigration. So I think you're going to see a real fight in September over this. I think that's what people are talking about, at least the people I talk to are talking about in Washington right now. Calm before the storm, not a lot going on, but come September, it's going to be off to the races, and that's going to be the issue.
Well, if you're right and the Republican rank and file in Congress want a government shutdown or a government confrontation over, let's say, Obamacare or something else, they still have to convince the Republican leadership in the Senate and the House that that's the right strategy because, leaders can basically do what they want on the Senate floor or on the House floor. Do you think the Republican leadership isn't so inclined to do exactly what you suggest the rank and file want to do, confrontation?
Oh, I don't think the Republican leadership wants to see that at all. I just don't know that the Republican leadership controls its caucus. And there are some affirmative steps that need to be taken to avoid a government shutdown or at least a partial shutdown or at least a default on the debt. And when it comes to the debt ceiling, you have to affirmatively raise the debt ceiling at some point. When it comes to a shutdown, we could do continuing resolutions as we continue to have done for years now in Washington. And there are certain mechanisms to keep certain parts of the government open. But there are some affirmative steps that need to be taken, and the Republicans are threatening to not take those steps, which would lead ultimately to a government shutdown. The Republican leadership does not want to do that. They understand the ramifications. They remember what happened when Newt Gingrich did it. There is no question on their minds who will be blamed for it. And if that happens, God forbid that happens, they're going to be in big trouble in the local elections in 2013, and they could lose seats in the midterms in 2014, which would be unprecedented.
Well, no, Bill Clinton managed to.
Yes, no, I thought of that the minute I said it.
let me just ask you this though. Let's assume you're right, but there's also problems on the other side. Latest Gallup poll shows President Obama's approval on the economy falling to 35%. His overall job approval 41% or 42%. The economy doesn't seem to be responding to the president's summer initiatives. What's going wrong with the economy in the public's perception, and what can President Obama do to try to change that?
Well, the president is now, well into his second term, and his approval, the economy has not rebounded completely from where it was when he took over. And you're going to start to see him having less and less influence domestically. You know this, John. I don't need to tell you. President's second terms, you really got 18 months. I think this president had about a year to get things going. And, in the last 8 months or so, he hasn't really been able to get a lot going on the economy and on his domestic policy agenda. So I think from now on, the president's going to have to turn his attention and his legacy towards foreign policy matters and try to get some wins there. Because he's going to have few and far between here on domestic policy issues. That said, he's still great on the stump, and he's going to be a
sure. Well, yes, but foreign policy success is the most pressing need right now is the Middle East. How does one pull a foreign policy success out of a hat that's named Egypt?
Man, John, if I knew that, I'd be making a lot more money than I am today.
Well, you'd be our ambassador there probably, which would be a fun job, right?
I'd be
right. Listen,
United Nations.
What do you make? What do you make of Chris Christie's speech to the Republican National Committee saying that the party basically has a choice? It can either be a debating society and discuss philosophy, or it can go out and win elections. And he looks like he took a couple of shots at two of his potential rivals, the Republican presidential nomination, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal and Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky.
I think he's absolutely right. And I think the Republican Party, if they want to be competitive in 2016, will nominate that guy. He's a damn good politician, and he's a guy who appeals to people down the middle. I fear him more than anybody else in the Republican Party, anybody else.
Well, the problem is with that kind of endorsement, a lot of Republican primary voters listening to this program will say, well, he's giving us advice, we'll do something else because he wants Chris Christie.
Well, I'm a professional pundit now. You know, I don't really work for any particular candidate at the moment.
You got your analyst hat on.
Yeah, I'm giving good, sound political advice. And the one guy mentioned on the national stage in the Republican Party that has any chance of getting elected president of the United States is Chris Christie.
The one guy.
Marco Rubio might be there in some senses of the word, but if he goes through with the government shutdown, he's out. But Chris Christie has a real chance. He's a no-nonsense, no-hold-bar politician who's got a good record on some moderate issues, who's governed a blue state effectively.
Now, one other thing that came out of the Republican National Committee meeting in Boston this week was there was today a unanimous resolution passed from the Republican National Committee saying we really oppose these Hillary movie projects that CNN and NBC are putting on. What's your take on that?
I think they're making a big mistake. You know, these guys are all political people who've worked on campaigns, and one thing political people on campaigns want to do is control the message. And, you know, I don't think that the greatness of Hillary Clinton is what these movies are going to be about. I think you're going to hear about Monica Lewinsky. You're going to hear about, I can't remember the guy's name who killed himself.
No, the problem is this. The NBC movie begins in 1998 after all of those scandals other than Monica Lewinsky had already gone by the board. So it's purposefully selective so that most of what Hillary got in trouble with in the 1990s won't be even covered.
Yeah, you know what, though? I don't know how you make a movie.
They're doing it.
I don't know how you make a movie that people are going to watch without putting salacious details into it.
Well, no, Monica Lewinsky will substitute for all the other scandals, and that wasn't her scandal, that was Bill's scandal. So she'll be the long-suffering martyr who had to endure this fellow.
Look, I want to control the message when I run a campaign, and I don't want a guy who's directed the Kennedy movie, and a documentarian has directed some really hard-hitting documentaries.
From the left.
Well, yeah, but he's in it to make a movie. And these guys want to make a movie that people are going to want to watch. And the Hillary Clinton victory movie is not the movie they want to watch. And I think.
Oh, come on! I am woman. Hear me roar. There are women all over America who view Hillary as a heroic figure for what she went through.
These guys have made movies that they put millions of dollars into movies. Like, remember the Kennedy movie? They put $20 million into it. The Discovery Channel did, or the History Channel, and then they didn't even want to air it because it was so bad. So I think
it did very well on Starz Network. It got good ratings there. I think the History Channel dropped it because of pressure from the Kennedy family.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think what you're going to see here is you're giving NBC at least an excuse to drop this movie, which they probably will at some point, because who's going to want to watch it? If it's just a fluff piece on Hillary, nobody's going to want to watch it. They're going to want to tune in for the dirty details, and the Republican Party should understand that, and they should also understand, Reince Priebus, this is the thing about him. The guy, I don't understand how he's still the chairman of the Republican Party. He can't win an election to save his life, and he doesn't understand that candidates need to control the message, and by allowing a film producer who wants the salacious details to put the message and have final cut on this movie, well, that's not good. And I don't think the Clinton people want to see that movie come out, and Republicans are doing the best to make sure it doesn't.
Chris, I want to segue into one other thing that you know very well, which is New York politics. In a few days, we're going to have a major primary in New York City to select successor to Mayor Michael Bloomberg. The real action is in the Democratic primary, lots of candidates. How do you handicap that race and how it's going?
Well, I think, on the mayor's side, there's going to definitely be a runoff. I think the one person I'm sure will be in the runoff is Christine Quinn,
the Speaker of the New York City Council.
And then you'll have to see whether it's Bill Thompson or former Comptroller Bill Thompson or the public advocate Bill de Blasio could be the other candidate there. Right now, Bill de Blasio's got a little bit of momentum. It's looking like him, but I do not believe it I think that Thompson is going to get the edge, and he'll make it into the runoff. And it'll be a very interesting runoff between Thompson and Quinn. There are some people out there saying that Thompson just doesn't have the fire in his belly after he lost the mayoralty 4 years ago. He went into the private sector, made a lot of money, and is very comfortable and happy in those roles that he's had. And he hasn't been really putting his heart in it. He's just been pushed into it by people who thought he should have won 4 years ago. So there's a lot of that talk, but I don't believe that either. I've seen him out on the trail. I think he's doing a great job. Anthony Weiner won't be a factor in the final vote here.
Would he have had a chance if he hadn't had the scandal redux, Part D?
I think he would have. I think he was the most dynamic of the candidates out there. I'm not saying that these are bad people. They all have good experience, but Anthony Weiner is a dynamic speaker who captures people's attention. And had he been able to kind of fully recover, he would have been a factor. He would have made it into a runoff and would have been a major factor here. Would have killed De Blasio. De Blasio would have had no chance at all. So you would have definitely had a Quinn, perhaps Thompson runoff, or maybe a Quinn Weiner runoff. So that's the case. Elliot Spitzer's going to get elected controller of the state of New York.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it depends. I mean, look, Elliot Spitzer was a very good attorney general.
He lost most of his cases.
Well,
he did.
He forced people into, don't talk about the wins and the losses. There were a lot of.
Do you want a prosecutor who loses a bunch of cases, which means that he shouldn't have prosecuted them?
With Wall Street and with some other firms were very important. There are a lot of people who were affected by him. Look,
affected by him, they were dragged into court and unfairly because they were acquitted. I mean, do you want a prosecutor who basically makes more mistakes than he makes correct calls?
You're making me defend Elliot Spitzer.
Well, you are.
If you know anything about my politics, I've never been an Elliot Spitzer guy.
Well, maybe you should agree with me rather than try to.
I was kind of Swazi's guy. I was involved with the primary against him for governor. But it's look, I'm not an Elliot Spitzer guy, and I do agree with you on most cases. That said, he's going to win because people don't show up to vote in primaries for controller of the city of New York. They come out to vote for mayor, and there's a lot of attention on the mayor's race. And then they're going to say, who are these two guys running for controller? Oh, Elliot Spitzer. I remember him.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask you something else. The latest Quinnipiac poll, which shows Spitzer with a big lead, has some fascinating demographic breakdowns. Basically, Spitzer would be behind his opponent right now if African Americans weren't voting. But he has a big lead, over 2-1 among African Americans. Is there something I'm missing here as to why African Americans would be so supportive of Elliot Spitzer? Because he's not exactly been a leader in the civil rights movement.
He hasn't been great. He hasn't been bad, but he hasn't gone out of his way. But that said, it's also a community that tends to forgive people from scandals better. Like
Charlie Rangel, the congressman from Harlem, for example.
Like Bill Clinton, the president of the United States. Look, what he did was a personal scandal. I think what he did was worse than what Anthony Weiner's done. Anthony Weiner's thing, is creepy or whatever it is, but at the end of the day, Anthony Weiner didn't break any laws.
Well, Chris, I want to ask you one final question. Because because Republicans have sex scandals too, Democrats have sex scandals.
Yeah, Vitter swapped with a prostitute, got reelected as a family values conservative in Louisiana.
But my point is this: people always say it's just a personal matter, but think about this: anyone in public office, high public office, who does these things subject themselves to blackmail, and we have seen people do amazing things to try to cover up these scandals. If they're subject to blackmail, shouldn't voters be concerned about it?
Yeah, of course they should be.
Well, that's no longer a personal issue only, right? If they're subject to blackmail in their official duties.
You make an excellent point. That said, the libertarian side of me, and I know you don't believe that there's any of it, the libertarian side of me thinks that prostitution should be legal. I mean, get rid of the underground portion of it that's forcing women into poverty. But women who are consenting adults and want to do this a living, and men for that matter, maybe they should have that opportunity.
Well, anyway, Chris, the problem with that, of course, is even if prostitution were legal, people would still try to cover it up because there's a lot of social opprobrium attached to it that has nothing to do with the illegality of it, and people would still be subject to blackmail.
And you're absolutely right. I think that's another problem in our society.
Well, listen, I want to thank you so much, Chris Hahn, who's a political strategist and former aide to Senator Chuck Schumer of New York. Thanks for being with us, and go back to that game and do well.